Right now, more than 1,000 feet above 57th Street in Manhattan, there is a crack. Not a hairline, not the kind of cosmetic fracture that every concrete building develops as it settles into its first decade. According to a lawsuit filed in the New York State Supreme Court, there is a crack 10 inches deep inside the reinforced concrete core of the tallest residential building in the Western Hemisphere, 10 inches into the structural spine of the most expensive condominium ever built in New York City, a building that cost more than $3 billion, a building marketed as the building of the 21st century, a building where a single penthouse sold for nearly $88 million. And according to the people who live there, that building is failing from the inside out. This is the story of 432 Park Avenue. It is a story about physics and money and ambition and the specific decisions that get made when a developer wants a building to look a certain way and the engineers tell him it cannot safely be built that way. It is a story with a dead architect, a foreclosed developer, a Saudi billionaire who has never spent a single night in the penthouse he bought, and a condo board that is now accusing the people who built their building of what their attorneys call a deliberate and far-reaching fraud. It is a long story, and I'm going to tell you all of it, because the short version that has been circulating does not do justice to how this happened or to how many warnings were ignored along the way. Let me start with the ambition, because you cannot understand the failure without understanding what they were trying to do. In 2011, a New York real estate developer named Harry Macklowe stood up at a global real estate conference and announced that he was going to build a monument. Macklowe is a legend in New York development. He is an old-school operator who takes enormous swings and does not deal in small gestures. His words, by multiple accounts, were that this would be the building of the 21st century, the way the Empire State Building was the building of the 20th. He was not selling apartments, he was selling a place in history. The site was the old Drake Hotel on Park Avenue, which Macklowe had acquired in 2006 for around $413 million. To build his monument, he partnered with a Los Angeles-based investment firm called CIM Group, which had stepped in years earlier to help rescue Macklowe's position on the site. And to design it, he hired one of the most celebrated architects alive, Rafael Viñoly, the Uruguayan-born designer behind the Tokyo International Forum and a string of internationally recognized buildings. The structural engineering went to WSP, the firm that helped invent the modern super-tall skyscraper. On paper, this was the best team money could assemble. The design Viñoly produced was famously inspired by a trash can, specifically a 1905 wastebasket designed by the Austrian designer Josef Hoffmann, which Viñoly reportedly kept on his desk. A perfect square grid, clean and repeating, scaled up into a tower. The most expensive residential building in the Western Hemisphere was modeled on a receptacle for garbage. I am not editorializing when I say that. It is in the public record of how the building was designed, and I personally think it is one of those details that seems like a small irony at the start of a story and then grows heavier as the story goes on. Here is what they set out to build: a tower 1,396 feet tall, 96 stories, a footprint that is a perfect square, roughly 93 feet on each side. That produces a height-to-width ratio of about 15:1. I want you to sit with that number because it is the root of everything that follows. Engineers classify a building as wind-sensitive when its height-to-width ratio crosses 5:1. 432 Park Avenue was designed at 3 times that threshold. When it topped out, it was the most slender, super tall building on the planet. Picture a number 2 pencil balanced on its eraser, and then picture the wind blowing across the top of it. That is the physics problem the engineers were handed. The specific danger in a tower this slender is not simply that the wind pushes it. It is a phenomenon called vortex shedding. When wind flows around a tall, slender structure, it does not just press against the face of the building and stop. It curls. It peels off the sides in alternating spinning eddies, first off one side, then the other, in a repeating rhythm. Engineers call that pattern a vortex street, and here's the dangerous part. If the rhythm of that vortex shedding happens to match the natural frequency at which the building wants to sway, the two reinforce each other, and the tower begins to oscillate sideways, perpendicular to the wind, in a feedback loop that can grow far beyond what the raw wind speed would suggest. The taller and thinner the building, the worse this problem becomes. For an office tower, some sway is tolerable because the workers go home at 6 o'clock. For a residential building, where people are trying to sleep, where they are trying to fill a bathtub, where they expect their doors to close, sway is a far bigger problem. So Vignoli and WSP built a layered defense against the wind, and I want to walk through it, because the sophistication of the engineering is part of what makes the later failures so striking. First, they cut 5 open mechanical floors into the tower, each one spanning 2 stories, spaced roughly every 12 floors up the height of the building. These are the dark open gaps you can see from the street. The idea is that wind blows straight through those openings, like punching holes in the sail of a boat, disrupting the organized vortex street before it can build into a destructive rhythm. Second, at each of those mechanical levels, they installed outrigger trusses spanning 2 full stories, tying the central concrete core to the perimeter columns to stiffen the whole structure. Third, they wrapped the entire tower in a grid of white concrete columns, a kind of exoskeleton, spaced at regular intervals up the full height. Fourth, they anchored the foundation with around 60 rock anchors, driven 60 to 70 feet down into Manhattan bedrock. And fifth, at the very top, between floors 86 and 89, they installed 2 enormous tuned mass dampers, each weighing roughly 660 tons, designed to swing in opposition to the building's motion and cancel it out. At the center of all of it, holding the entire system together, is a 30-foot square reinforced concrete core with walls roughly 30 inches thick at the base. That core is the spine of the building. It carries the wind loads. It resists the lateral forces. It is the single element in the entire structure that you cannot afford to compromise, because if the spine fails, every other system fails with it. And that spine, according to the April 2025 lawsuit, is exactly where the 10-inch crack is now located. The materials were as extreme as the geometry. According to the engineering record, the project used around 70,000 cubic yards of concrete and 12,500 tons of reinforcing steel. The lower 38 stories were poured with concrete rated at 14,000 pounds per square inch, roughly twice the strength of a typical high-rise mix, strong enough in engineering terms to support a small mountain. And for the exterior, the team developed a specialized white Portland cement, chosen specifically for its color, for the way it would stand out clean and pale against the glass towers of Midtown. The structural engineers would later describe producing that high-strength, pumpable white concrete, capable of being pushed up nearly 1,400 feet without separating or discoloring, as one of the most demanding challenges of the entire project. And this is where I have to pause, because this is the hinge of the entire story. The white concrete was the signature. It was the brand. It was the thing that made 432 Park look like 432 Park. And according to the lawsuit, protecting that white concrete, keeping it pure and visible, drove a series of decisions that the residents now say doomed the building. If you have a strong opinion already about choosing the way a building looks over the way a building lasts, I want you to hold on to that thought, because I am going to ask you about it later. And the comment section on this one is going to be worth reading. But let me keep building the timeline first, because the warnings, according to the complaint, started before they poured a single floor. Construction began in earnest on the Drake Hotel site around 2012. The main contractor was Lend-Lease. The challenge they faced had genuinely never been solved at this scale. How do you pour tens of thousands of cubic yards of specialized white concrete into a 1,396-foot tower on a cramped Manhattan lot, on a tight schedule, while keeping the color consistent and the strength intact all the way up? The answer was a self-climbing concrete core system, a pouring apparatus with a replacing boom and a crane that hydraulically lifted itself about 16 feet at a time as each floor was completed. Floor by floor, the tower rose at what observers at the time described as unusual speed. According to the 2025 complaint, the problem with the beautiful white concrete was durability. The engineers, the lawsuit says, wanted to add a standard ingredient called fly ash to the concrete mix. Fly ash makes concrete significantly more durable and more resistant to cracking over time. It is not exotic. It is used in concrete construction across the world. But fly ash, according to the complaint, would have made the concrete slightly darker. It would have compromised the pure white color that was the building's entire aesthetic identity. And so, the lawsuit alleges, the request to add fly ash was refused. The competitor coverage of this story has circulated a quote attributed to a structural engineer summarizing the choice in 3 words: color or cracks. I want to be careful here because I have not been able to independently verify that specific internal email in the primary court record available to me. So I am presenting it as what has been reported and alleged, not as established fact. But the broader allegation that durability was traded for appearance is at the center of the lawsuit the condo board actually filed. The engineers, according to the complaint, then proposed a backup plan. If they could not put fly ash in the concrete, they could coat the exterior with a thick, flexible elastomeric membrane, a waterproofing layer designed to seal any cracks that developed and block water from reaching the steel reinforcement inside the concrete. And here is the allegation that has become the headline of this entire story. According to the lawsuit, the developer rejected the elastomeric coating because an opaque coating would alter the appearance of the white concrete and reduce the building's appeal to the world's wealthiest buyers. Instead, according to the complaint, the facade received a clear silicone sealant, the same kind of material the lawsuit alleges was used to protect the hull of a yacht, a clear coating so the white concrete could still show through. The look of the building, the complaint argues, was chosen over the protection of the building. I personally think this is the decision the entire case turns on if the allegations hold up in court, because everything downstream flows from water getting into concrete that was not adequately protected against it. And I want to be precise about something: the careful coverage of this story gets right, and the sloppy coverage gets wrong. There are actually 2 separate problems here. One is the cracking of the exterior white concrete facade, which is what the fly ash and the coating decisions were about. The other is the 10-inch crack later alleged in the building's structural core, which is a deeper and more serious matter. Both are real allegations in the case. Only the facade cracking was, according to the complaint, the subject of warnings before construction. I'm not going to blur those 2 together the way some retellings have, because the distinction matters. The tower topped out in October of 2014. It was certified complete in December of 2015. The first residents began moving in almost immediately, and almost immediately, according to the residents, the building began telling a very different story than the one in the marketing. And the marketing, I should say, was extraordinary. Macklowe reportedly spent around $1 million to commission a 4-minute promotional film from an Emmy-recognized production company. The centerpiece of the film was Philippe Petit, the high-wire artist famous for walking a tightrope between the Twin Towers in 1974, now depicted walking a virtual wire from the Empire State Building directly to 432 Park Avenue. The torch symbolically being passed from the building of the 20th century to the building of the 21st. It was abstract, it was artful, and by every financial measure, it worked. By 2014, before construction was even finished, half the units had sold for a combined $1 billion. By 2015, the building was 90% sold. The cheapest unit in the entire tower still cost more than $1 million. 432 Park became, briefly, the first condominium building in New York City history to cross $2 billion in sales. The projected total sellout was $3.1 billion. And by the developer's own reported accounting, the partnership cleared somewhere around $900 million in profit, The buyers were exactly who you would expect. Fawaz Al-Hokair, a Saudi retail billionaire whose company controls franchise rights to major global brands across the Middle East, paid $87.7 million for the penthouse on the 96th floor in 2016. Co-developer CIM Group, according to reporting, provided a $56 million loan to facilitate that very purchase. Thomas Peterfy, the founder of Interactive Brokers, took the entire 84th floor. Jennifer Lopez and Alex Rodriguez reportedly moved in by 2018. Many of the buyers purchased through anonymous shell companies, keeping their names out of the public record, which is itself part of the story of what these towers were really for. A significant number of the units at the top of Billionaires Row were never primarily intended to be homes. They were vaults, places to park global wealth in a stable market above a city most of the owners barely lived in. And here is where I want to ask you the first question, because we are about to leave the ambition behind and walk into the failures. And the comments section is the best part of a story like this. When you buy something purely as a trophy, purely as a place to store money, do you think you have the same right to be outraged when it falls apart as someone who actually needed a home? I genuinely want to know how you come down on that, because it shapes how you read everything that comes next. Tell me in the comments before you finish the video, and then tell me again at the end, and see if your answer changed. Because the failures, when they came fast. The first sales had barely closed when the water started. On November 5th, 2017, according to the record, a catastrophic flood tore through the building between the 83rd and the 86th floors. A buyer named Juan Beckman Vidal, the chairman of the company behind the Jose Cuervo tequila brand and a member of one of Mexico's wealthiest families, had been in contract for an apartment priced at $46.25 million on the 86th floor. After the flooding, he sued to get his deposit back. That dispute was reportedly settled quietly about a year later. The leaks did not stop. In late November 2018, two major water failures happened within 4 days of each other. A flange burst on the 60th floor on November 22nd, and a water line failed on the 74th floor on November 26th. Water poured down 2 of the 4 residential elevator shafts. According to the record, total water damage in 2018 alone reached $9.7 million. 35 apartments were damaged by leaks, an elevator was out of service for weeks, and the building's insurance premiums, according to the residents, rose 300% over 2 years. By 2019, the residents were holding owners' meetings, and the minutes from those meetings began to read like dispatches from a haunted ship. Creaking, banging, clicking, metal partitions groaning as the building moved in the wind. A whistle in the door frames and the elevator shafts, which residents described as constant. Pipes inside the walls, according to the complaints, vibrated so violently when the tower swayed that bathtubs became effectively unusable because the water would not sit still. And then there is the detail that, more than any other, captured the public imagination: the trash chute. 432 Park Avenue's garbage chute is a straight vertical drop of roughly 1,300 feet, with no brakes and no offsets to slow anything down. When a resident on a high floor drops a bag of trash into it, that bag accelerates the entire way down, and by the time it reaches the bottom, it is moving at something approaching terminal velocity. According to the board meeting minutes, residents reported the impact vibrating through the walls of their bedrooms, a sound they described as a bomb going off inside the building, on a schedule every single time someone took out the garbage. Imagine paying $20 million for an apartment in the most exclusive tower in New York and being woken by what sounds like an explosion every time a neighbor throws away a milk carton. Then came Halloween night, October 31st, 2019. The wind picked up over Manhattan. A resident stepped into one of the building's residential elevators. The system, as it is designed to do in high wind, slowed the car, and then it stopped. That resident sat trapped inside the elevator car, somewhere in the sky above 57th Street, for 1 hour and 25 minutes. The cause, according to reporting, traced back to the building's movement in the wind exceeding what the elevator system could comfortably absorb. In June of 2021, there was an electrical explosion, an arc flash in a mechanical room. According to reporting, a contractor working on a leak had drilled into live wiring and was thrown by the blast. It was, by the residents' account, the second such explosion in 3 years. If you are keeping a running tally in your head of everything that has gone wrong in a building not yet a decade old, I want you to drop a number in the comments right now. Just your gut estimate of how many separate defects you think a forensic survey would find in a building like this. Hold that number, because when I tell you the figure the condo board survey actually arrived at, I want to know how close you were. In September of 2021, the condo board filed its first lawsuit against the developers, CIM Group and Maclo Properties, and the sponsor entity they had formed to build the tower. According to Bloomberg's reporting, the board sought as much as $250 million in damages, and the complaint documented more than 1,500 construction and design defects in the common elements of the building alone, many of which it described as life safety issues. The complaint included a line that has been widely quoted that the situation represented one of the worst examples of sponsor malfeasance in the development of a luxury condominium in the history of New York City. According to the residents, the chairman of CIM Group had even privately acknowledged that the noise and vibration inside the tower were, in his word, intolerable. The developers rejected the lawsuit forcefully. They called it ill-advised. They described 432 Park as a treasure and characterized the building as containing a sophisticated symphony of systems that simply needed fine-tuning as residents settled in. They said they had attempted to do further work but had been denied access to the building by the board. And notably, the developers argued that the lawsuit was not even supported by all the residents. Maclo himself reportedly described the board's lawsuit as a scorpion biting its own back, because, in his view, publicizing the building's problems was destroying the value of the very units the residents were trying to protect. That first lawsuit did not resolve cleanly. It ground forward through the courts for years. By 2024, according to public reporting, it had produced more than 4 million pages of documents and dozens of days of deposition testimony. The fight became a finger-pointing exercise among the developer, the general contractor Lend-Lease, the engineering firm, the architect, and the various subcontractors, each pointing at the others. While the sponsor's liability was shielded behind the limited liability company structure that developers use precisely for situations like this. And while that litigation dragged on, the developer's own personal fortunes inside the building collapsed in a way that reads almost like a parable. In 2022, Harry Maclo purchased 3 units in his own building on the 78th and 28th floors for around $47 million. The financing for that purchase, according to reporting, came in the form of more than $46 million in loans from his own co-developer, CIM Group. The relationship between Maclo and CIM had been deteriorating for years, with Maclo alleging that CIM had cheated him out of more than $100 million in distributions he believed he was owed, and CIM alleging that Maclo was living lavishly while defaulting on the loans they had extended to him. In August 2023, CIM moved to foreclose on Maclo's units. He delayed the foreclosure with a bankruptcy filing, but he could not stop it. The man who called 432 Park the building of the 21st century lost his own apartments inside it, foreclosed on by the very partner he had built it with. Those forfeited 78th floor units, according to reporting, went into contract in early 2026 for around $53 million, sold not by Maclo, but by a CIM-linked entity. In March of 2023, Rafael Vignoli died. He was 78 years old. He died before the second and far more serious lawsuit was filed, which means the architect of the building never had to answer in a courtroom for any of what came out afterward. I want to note, because it is fair to note, that Vignoli's defenders point out that many of the most damaging decisions alleged in the case were developer decisions, not architect decisions, and that the tension between Vignoli and Maclo over design choices was well documented while the architect was alive. Vignoli was also no stranger to signature buildings producing unintended consequences. His walkie-talkie tower in London, with its concave glass facade, focused sunlight intensely enough to damage cars parked on the street below and channeled winds strong enough to knock pedestrians off their feet. He publicly acknowledged that his team had made mistakes on that project. The pattern, his critics argue, was consistent. A bold signature shape is chosen, physics objects, and eventually the people using the building pay the price. Then, in April of 2025, the condo board filed its second lawsuit, and this one was bigger, and the language was far heavier. The 2025 complaint runs 46 pages. It seeks $165 million in damages, and it uses a phrase the first lawsuit did not: deliberate and far-reaching fraud. The core allegation of the second lawsuit is not merely that the building was poorly built. It is that the developers knew it was defective and concealed that knowledge in order to keep selling units at top prices. According to the complaint, a facade survey conducted in 2016, while the building was still actively being sold, identified 1,893 defects in the exterior, more than half of which were classified as life safety items. That report, the lawsuit alleges, was concealed from buyers who were signing contracts at the same time. The complaint goes further. According to CNN's reporting on the filing, the lawsuit alleges that the architecture firm SLCE made materially false claims in the building's offering plan, the legal disclosure document that buyers review before purchasing. The complaint cites a specific change in the document's wording. Language that originally stated the concrete will prevent water penetration was allegedly changed to say it was designed to prevent water penetration. One word, will, changed to designed to. In legal terms, the lawsuit argues, that is the difference between a guarantee and a hope. And the change was allegedly made because the developers already knew the facade could not deliver the guarantee. The complaint also alleges that the contractor and the engineering firm sent a letter to the New York City Department of Buildings that misrepresented the nature, extent, and type of the cracking, allegedly omitting the most damaging findings of their own internal survey while people were still buying and moving into the building. And at the center of all of it is the 10-inch crack. According to the 2025 complaint, the facade's defective design left it plagued with thousands of severe cracks, spalling, and deterioration, which led to major water infiltration and flooding, and, critically, to corrosion of the steel rebar reinforcing the concrete columns. I read you the exact substance of that allegation because it is the heart of the structural concern. When water reaches the steel reinforcement inside concrete, the steel begins to rust. When steel rusts, it expands, sometimes to several times its original volume. That expansion cracks the surrounding concrete from the inside out. The new cracks admit more water. The additional water corrodes more steel. The process feeds on itself, and it does not stabilize, and it does not reverse on its own. The complaint alleges that this process is now underway inside the structural columns of the building, and that somewhere inside the core, the spine that holds the entire 1,396-foot tower upright against the wind, there is a crack 10 inches deep. The developers deny all of it. CIM Group, in a statement to multiple outlets, said it vehemently denies the claim and will be moving to dismiss the complaint. The developers have previously characterized the residents' allegations as exaggerated. As of the most recent public record, the case is pending. It has not been ruled on, and these allegations have not been tested in court. I want to be completely clear about that, because it matters. This is a lawsuit, not a verdict. What I have described is what the condo board alleges, supported by the survey documents and the offering plan language their attorneys have cited. The other side is entitled to its defense, and it has stated its defense plainly. Now, I want to turn to the part of this story that I think gets too little attention, which is what it has actually been like to live there and what the money has done. In 2021, The New York Times reporter Stefanos Chen broke the definitive account of the residents' experience. A woman named Serena Abramovich, who had paid $17 million for her unit in 2016, told him that she had been convinced it would be the best building in New York, that the developers were still billing it as a gift to the world, and that it was not. She told him that everybody in the building hated each other. She told him that if she had known then what she knew now, she would never have bought. And she said one sentence that I think captures the entire story better than any engineering report could. Everything here, she said, was camouflage. The financial wreckage tells the same story in numbers. Thomas Peterfy sold his 84th floor unit in 2024 for $13.5 million, a substantial loss on what he had paid. A unit on the 79th floor, originally listed at $135 million, was cut to $92 million in 2023 and finally sold that October for $65.6 million, less than half its original asking price. In the penthouse, the $87.7 million trophy on the 96th floor that Fawaz Al-Hokair bought in 2016 and reportedly never spent a night in, became the symbol of the whole collapse. He listed it in 2021 for $169 million, aiming to nearly double his money in the post-pandemic luxury boom and set a city record. It did not sell. He cut it to $130 million in 2023. He cut it again to $105 million in 2024. And here, I have to correct a piece of misinformation that is spread through the sloppier retellings of this story. The penthouse was not listed at $15 million. That figure is false. What is true is striking enough without exaggeration. A Saudi billionaire has been trying to unload an $88 million penthouse for years, cutting the price by tens of millions. As of the most recent reporting, even at a steeply reduced price, it has been extraordinarily difficult to sell. The wealthiest buyers in the world have looked at that apartment and at the lawsuits surrounding the building and walked away. Even the amenities tell the story. The private members restaurant that was supposed to be a crown jewel perk for residents reportedly cost each household around $1,200 a year when the building opened in 2015. By 2020, according to the residents, that annual charge had climbed to around $15,000. The costs of keeping the building running were landing on the people who lived there in ways the marketing never mentioned, and the largest bill has not even arrived. According to estimates cited in the reporting, refurbishing the two 660-ton tuned mass dampers at the top of the tower, the counterweights that are the only thing keeping the building sway within livable limits, could cost on the order of $100 million on its own. The facade remediation has been estimated in similar territory. For a building not yet 10 years old, the repair bills run into the hundreds of millions of dollars, on top of the litigation, which reportedly consumes millions of dollars a year in legal fees on its own.